Kyoto, 1651. The final strike arrived without drama, without warning, without mercy. One moment Ichi stood grounded, breathing steadily, 7 years of discipline behind him, and the next his Bakken shattered in his hands with a sound that echoed louder than defeat itself. Wood split apart like bone, fragments skidding across the floor as the force of the blow traveled straight through his arms and into his chest. 30 seconds. That was all it took. 30 seconds for everything he believed about himself to collapse. The crowd didn't erupt. They didn't gasp. They went silent. 400 people watching a man realize, all at once, that he was not who he thought he was. His opponent lowered his weapon and smiled, not with cruelty, but with certainty. A smile that said, "You were never ready." That smile stayed with Ichi longer than the pain. As he stepped off the tournament platform, the weight of the broken weapon felt heavier than any loss he had imagined. 7 years of training had promised him something different. It promised progress. It promised mastery. It promised that discipline would eventually protect him. But in that moment, discipline failed him completely. Or rather, it revealed the truth. What he had practiced was not devotion, but repetition. Not awareness, but routine. He had trained hard enough to feel proud, but never hard enough to be transformed. That realization struck deeper than the defeat itself. That night, alone in the darkness, Ichi sat with the remains of his broken Bakken resting beside him like a corpse. He replayed every movement in his mind, every decision, every hesitation. The loss wasn't sudden. It had been forming quietly for years. Comfort disguised as discipline. Effort diluted by habit. He had followed the rules, respected the forms, endured the hours, yet something essential had been missing. The ancient texts never warned him about this. The Book of 5 Rings spoke of strategy and spirit, of timing and emptiness, but it never explained the cost of real discipline. It never said that discipline does not sharpen the self, it destroys it. Miyamoto Musashi did not become legendary by improving who he was. He became legendary by eliminating who he was. That truth arrived like a blade to the chest. Extreme discipline is not an upgrade. It is a replacement. It strips away the comfortable version of you, the one that survives on excuses and partial effort, and leaves nothing standing. What replaces it is not guaranteed. Most people never make it that far. Most quit before the erasure is complete. As the night stretched on, Ichi realized something even more unsettling than failure. The enemy had never been his opponent. It had never been talent or luck or timing. The enemy was comfort. Comfort had crept into his training, softened his awareness, dulled his hunger. Comfort had allowed him to believe he was disciplined when he was merely consistent. In that silence, with defeat still burning in his body, he understood that the version of himself who walked into that tournament could never move forward. That version was already dead. By morning, the pain in his ribs throbbed with each breath, but it no longer mattered. Pain was honest. Comfort was not. The path ahead was suddenly clear and terrifying in equal measure. To continue as he was meant living asleep. To move forward meant annihilation of everything familiar. The discipline he sought would not make him better. It would erase him completely. And for the first time in his life, that thought did not scare him. It felt inevitable. Morning arrived without mercy. Ichi had not slept. Each time his eyes closed, the splintering sound of wood returned, sharp and final. His body moved on instinct, dressing itself slowly as bruises surfaced across his ribs and shoulders, dark reminders of the lesson he could not escape. Every step toward the dojo felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself resisted him. The city was awake, but for the first time in years, he felt separate from it, like a ghost moving through familiar streets. Discipline had once given him identity. Now it had stripped him bare. Inside the dojo, the air carried the quiet weight of judgment. Conversations faded when he entered, not out of cruelty, but out of pity. That was worse. Pity suggested permanence, as if his failure had already been catalogued and accepted. Students who once trained beside him avoided his eyes. Others stared too long, searching for cracks in a man they had assumed was unbreakable. Ichi bowed and took his place among them, his movements precise, controlled, empty. He repeated the basic forms he had performed thousands of times before. Every strike was technically flawless. Every strike was meaningless. Adequate. That word echoed in his mind like a curse. His master, Yamamoto, observed from the shadows. He did not interrupt. He did not correct. He simply watched. That silence unsettled Ichi more than any reprimand. Discipline thrives on feedback, and the absence of it felt like abandonment. Hours passed. Sweat soaked into the wooden floor. Muscles burned, then numbed. Still, the silence continued. It wasn't until the final bow that Yamamoto spoke, his voice calm, almost indifferent. "You trained hard," the master said. "Hard enough to impress others. Hard enough to convince yourself." He paused, allowing the words to settle. "But you never trained dangerously." The sentence cut deeper than any blow. Dangerous training. Ichi had never considered it. His routine was punishing, but predictable. Structured. Safe. He endured pain, but only the pain he expected. He chased exhaustion, not transformation. Yamamoto stepped closer, his eyes steady, unreadable. "Discipline that does not threaten your identity is decoration," the master continued. "It looks impressive, but it changes nothing. Your ancestors walked this path honorably, but asleep. You followed them perfectly. That is why you failed." Ichi felt the urge to defend himself rise, sharp and desperate. Years of effort demanded recognition. Sacrifice demanded validation. But the words died before reaching his lips. For the first time, he saw the truth clearly. His discipline had been built to preserve who he was, not to destroy it. He had trained to remain himself, only better. That was the mistake. "You have a choice," Yamamoto said quietly. "Remain skilled and forgettable. Or die now and become something else." There was no ceremony in the declaration. No drama. Just fact. Discipline at its highest level does not negotiate. It demands everything. The person you are must vanish for the person you could be to exist. Most people misunderstand this. They believe discipline adds layers. In reality, it strips them away one by one until nothing familiar remains. That night, Ichi returned home and did something he had never done before. He sat in stillness and observed his breath. Not to calm himself. Not to meditate. But to watch. Within seconds, his mind rebelled. Thoughts scattered. Doubt surged. Impatience clawed for attention. He lost count, restarted, failed again. In that failure, a new realization surfaced. He had never truly been present in his own life. His discipline had kept him busy, but never awake. For the first time since his defeat, fear emerged, not of pain or loss, but of what lay ahead. If awareness alone was this difficult, then true discipline would be unbearable. And yet, beneath the fear, something else stirred. A quiet resolve. If comfort was the enemy, then awareness would be the weapon. And tomorrow, the real training would begin. The first days of awareness training were more brutal than any physical trial Ichi had endured. Before dawn, while the city still slept, he sat alone on the cold floor, counting his breaths as Yamamoto had instructed. Inhale. Exhale. Again. Again. The task appeared simple, almost insulting to a man forged by years of hardship. Yet within moments, his mind fractured. Memories invaded. Regret sharpened. Plans for redemption demanded attention. He lost count before reaching 10. Each failure felt like a confession. He had mastered the sword, but he could not master a single breath. This was the Earth Ring, Yamamoto explained later. The foundation. The discipline of seeing reality without illusion. The breath did not lie. It revealed exactly how absent he had been. Tens of thousands of breaths passed through his body each day, and he had lived inside only a fraction of them. The rest were spent elsewhere, rehearsing past victories, avoiding past failures, projecting futures that did not exist. Awareness did not comfort him. It exposed him. Pain soon followed. Not the sharp pain of impact or strain, but the dull ache of sustained presence. His legs cramped as he sat unmoving. His back protested. His shoulders tightened. Every instinct demanded escape. Stand up. Adjust. Distract. End the discomfort. Each impulse carried the same message: return to unconsciousness. Ichi began to understand that most suffering was not caused by pain itself, but by the mind's refusal to remain where the pain existed. Days blurred into repetition. Count. Fail. Begin again. Slowly, patterns emerged. He noticed how frustration arrived before restlessness, how doubt preceded distraction. These were not random thoughts. They were predictable sequences, rehearsed thousands of times without his awareness. For the first time, he wasn't fighting them. He was studying them. Observation replaced resistance, and in that shift, something subtle changed. The thoughts lost urgency. The emotions loosened their grip. When physical training resumed, the difference was immediate and unsettling. In sparring, emotions surfaced before movement. Fear rose before defense. Pride whispered before attack. Awareness illuminated these moments like lantern light in darkness. Naming them stripped them of their power. The sword became lighter, not because his strength had increased, but because unnecessary tension dissolved. He moved less, yet accomplished more. Yamamoto offered no praise. He never needed to. Discipline reveals itself in silence. During one exchange, a visiting warrior tested Ichi with aggressive speed. The strikes were sharp, precise, meant to overwhelm. But Ichi noticed something unexpected. He wasn't reacting. He was present. Each movement arose naturally, unforced. When the bout ended, there was no triumph, only clarity. Victory had nothing to do with dominance. It was the absence of inner conflict. Once awareness enters your life, returning to sleep becomes unbearable. Ichi felt it immediately. Moments of unconsciousness stood out like stains. A careless step. A distracted breath. Each lapse felt louder than before. This was the hidden cost Yamamoto had warned him about. Discipline does not make life easier. It removes your ability to lie to yourself. The Earth Ring did not end. It never would. Knowing yourself completely is impossible, but believing you already do is the beginning of decay. Each day exposed new layers of avoidance, subtler than the last. Comfort no longer hid in obvious places. It disguised itself as confidence, as routine, as earned rest. Awareness cut through them all. By the end of the third week, something inside Ichi had shifted permanently. He was not calmer. He was clearer. Fear still appeared. Doubt still whispered. But they no longer commanded him. Presence had become the battlefield, and for the first time, he was awake enough to fight on it. The sword had not changed. The warrior had. The fourth phase of training stripped away something deeper than technique. Awareness had shown Ichi how often his mind wandered, but now it revealed something more dangerous: attachment. He had become attached to being disciplined. To tracking his breath. To performing awareness correctly. Yamamoto sensed the shift before Ichi did. One morning, without explanation, the master altered everything. No breath counting. No scheduled meditation. No fixed number of strikes. Only a single instruction. Train until you don't know what comes next. Confusion surfaced immediately. Without structure, Ichi felt exposed. The familiar anchor of numbers and routines had vanished. He noticed irritation rising, subtle but sharp. Discipline had already begun forming an identity, Yamamoto warned, was just another cage. The Earth Ring was never about control. It was about truth. And truth does not obey schedules. Ichi began his practice uncertainly. He struck when he felt compelled, paused when fatigue appeared, resumed when presence returned. At first, it felt like regression. The precision he had built seemed to loosen. But beneath that surface disorder, a quieter intelligence emerged. His body adjusted without conscious command. When to rest. When to push. When to stop. The sword moved as if guided by something older than thought. Yamamoto observed from a distance, saying nothing. He understood the danger of premature explanation. Insight gained too early becomes philosophy. Philosophy becomes comfort. Comfort becomes sleep. The master allowed the tension to do its work. Several days passed like this. Ichi oscillated between frustration and surrender, between wanting rules and learning to trust awareness itself. During one session, exhaustion overtook him. His arms shook. Breath shortened. The urge to stop screamed through his body. Normally, discipline would have forced him onward. But awareness intervened. He noticed the voice behind the command to quit. It was not fatigue. It was fear, fear of uncertainty, fear of crossing a threshold without guarantees. He continued, not from obligation, but curiosity. What happens if I stay? Something broke open. The movement simplified. Effort disappeared. The sword flowed without resistance. Time stretched and collapsed simultaneously. There was no sense of doing the movement. Only movement happening. When it ended, he couldn't say how long he had practiced. Sweat cooled on his skin as if he had returned from somewhere distant. That night, he did not write numbers in his journal. He wrote a single sentence. I confused discipline with control. The realization unsettled him. Control had always been his shield. Rules had protected him from chaos. But real combat, real life, never followed patterns. Discipline was not rigidity. It was adaptability under pressure. The next morning, Yamamoto finally spoke. You are learning water before I teach it. That is good and dangerous. He explained that many warriors mistake repetition for mastery. They build flawless routines that collapse the moment conditions change. True discipline survives disruption. It remains present when certainty dissolves. Ichi noticed the change in his interactions. When challenged by other students, he did not tense. When corrected, he did not resist. Awareness absorbed the impact without reaction. He no longer needed to defend an image of himself. The self was no longer fixed. It moved, adjusted, dissolved. But this freedom carried weight. Without rigid structure, there was nowhere to hide. Every excuse evaporated. Every weakness stood exposed. Discipline without illusion demands constant honesty. The temptation to return to comfort grew stronger precisely because progress was real. He understood now why most people abandon the path not at the beginning, but after transformation begins. Change threatens the identity that pain once protected. On the final day of this phase, Yamamoto placed the broken bakken between them. Charred from the fire. This weapon represents who you were, he said. Rigid. Predictable. Sincere but asleep. He pushed it aside. You cannot use it again. Not because it is broken, but because you are not. Ichi bowed, not in gratitude, but in acknowledgement. He had crossed another threshold. Awareness was no longer something he practiced. It was something that practiced him. The man who had entered the dojo months ago would not survive this version of discipline. And for the first time, Ichi did not mourn that loss. He understood its necessity. The fifth stage did not announce itself with pain or exhaustion. It arrived quietly, almost gently, which made it far more dangerous. Ichi began to notice that awareness, once sharp and demanding, had softened. His movements were fluid, his reactions calm, his mind rarely wandered. From the outside, it looked like mastery. From the inside, something felt wrong. The edge was fading. Comfort had returned wearing a new disguise. Yamamoto saw it immediately. He always did. One evening, as the sun lowered and the dojo emptied, the master spoke without turning around. You are becoming skilled at awareness. That is the moment it becomes useless. The word struck deeper than any criticism before. Skill implies repetition without resistance. And resistance, Yamamoto taught, is where growth hides. The next day, everything intensified. Training hours doubled without warning. Rest periods vanished. Sparring partners rotated constantly, never allowing rhythm or prediction. Ichi was deliberately kept off balance. His body adapted quickly, but his mind resisted. Frustration crept in. Irritation followed. Awareness remained, but it began observing something new, resentment. He did not like this phase. He could not measure it. There were no milestones. No sense of progress. Only pressure. Yamamoto offered no explanations, only presence. When Ichi slowed, the master said nothing. When Ichi pushed too hard, the master said nothing. Silence became the lesson. Days blurred. Fatigue accumulated. Minor injuries stacked without recovery. During sparring, Ichi began to lose again. Not catastrophically, but enough to bruise pride. The old sensation returned, the memory of the tournament defeat. The temptation to protect his self-image flared. Awareness caught it instantly. He watched the ego rise like smoke, thin but persistent. One night, alone in the dojo, Ichi broke. He slammed the floor with his fist, anger finally escaping containment. The sound echoed. His breathing accelerated. Thoughts raced. This isn't working. I was better before. The mind demanded meaning, reward, reassurance. None came. Awareness simply observed the collapse without intervening. Minutes passed. The storm exhausted itself. What remained was silence. In that silence, Ichi recognized the trap. He had wanted discipline to make him feel strong. Respected. Certain. But discipline was never designed to protect feelings. It existed to expose them. The moment training began serving identity, it lost its function. The following morning, Yamamoto handed him a blade heavier than any he had used before. Carry this all day, he said. No training. Just help around the village. The order seemed pointless, almost insulting. Yet Ichi obeyed. The weight pulled at his shoulder. Every task became slower. Every movement deliberate. Farmers stared. Children whispered. Embarrassment surfaced. Awareness noted it. Let it pass. Hours later, exhaustion set in, not from effort, but from sustained presence under discomfort. There was no performance, no audience, no outcome. Just wait and time. By evening, something fundamental shifted. The blade stopped feeling heavy. Not because it was lighter, but because resistance dissolved. Acceptance replaced tension. That night, Yamamoto finally explained. Fire is coming. But before fire, you must understand this, discipline is not control. It is endurance without resentment. He paused. Most people can suffer. Very few can suffer without complaint. Ichi understood. His earlier suffering had been transactional. Pain exchanged for progress. Effort traded for validation. This stage removed the transaction. Training offered nothing in return. No visible reward. No recognition. Only the act itself. From that day forward, Ichi stopped asking whether training was working. The question no longer mattered. He trained because training was what remained when every illusion fell away. Pride burned off. Expectation dissolved. What survived was something quieter, heavier, and far more dangerous than motivation. Resolve without narrative. He felt it settle into his bones. Not excitement. Not confidence. Commitment. The kind that does not need witnesses. The kind that continues even when nothing improves. Especially then. And somewhere in that relentless neutrality, the warrior he was becoming stopped seeking permission to exist. The sixth phase began without ceremony. There was no announcement, no explanation, no visible shift in routine. Yet everything had changed. Ichi no longer resisted training, but neither did he embrace it. He moved through each day with quiet precision, not driven by desire or fear, but by something colder and more stable. The struggle that once defined his effort had thinned into a steady pressure, constant and unremarkable. Yamamoto introduced conflict deliberately. Sparring partners attacked unpredictably. Techniques were interrupted mid-motion. Commands contradicted each other. Ichi was told to advance and retreat at the same time, to commit fully while remaining ready to abandon the strike. The instructions were impossible by design. Confusion was the weapon. Observation was the defense. At first, the mind tried to resolve the contradictions. It searched for correct responses, optimal strategies. Awareness caught the effort and let it dissolve. Precision returned only when intention softened. The body learned to move without certainty. Decisions arose spontaneously, shaped by circumstance rather than plan. Ichi began to notice something unsettling. Pain no longer carried urgency. Fatigue appeared and passed without drama. Fear surfaced briefly, then faded. These sensations still existed, but they no longer commanded attention. They were data, not directives. The mind, stripped of authority, fell silent more often than not. One afternoon, during sparring, a strike slipped through his guard and landed cleanly against his ribs. The impact was sharp. The body recoiled. Yet there was no anger, no frustration, no internal commentary. Only correction. Adjustment. Continuation. His opponent hesitated, confused by the absence of reaction. That pause ended the exchange. Afterward, Yamamoto nodded once. Nothing more. Approval was no longer offered as fuel. It was unnecessary. As days passed, Ichi recognized the deeper shift. Discipline had stopped feeling like effort. It had become environment. Like gravity. Always present. No resistance required. He did not feel proud of this change. Pride would have implied ownership. This was not something he had achieved. It was something that had replaced him. The old questions stopped arising. Am I improving? How long will this take? What comes next? Those belonged to a person who believed the path led somewhere. That belief had dissolved. There was only the act itself, repeating endlessly, without progress or decline. One evening, Yamamoto spoke again. Most men quit when discipline hurts. Some quit when it becomes boring. Almost none survive when it becomes invisible. The word settled slowly. Invisible discipline offered no stimulation. No struggle. No relief. Only continuation. Ichi understood the danger immediately. Without emotional reward, the mind would attempt escape. It would seek novelty, validation, meaning. The only defense was acceptance. To remain present without craving engagement. That night, alone, he sat in silence. No meditation technique. No breath counting. Just stillness. Thoughts appeared and vanished. Sensations rose and fell. Time lost shape. He remained. In that stillness, a final realization surfaced. This was the point where most training systems ended. Where practitioners declared mastery. Where schools formed and teachings were repeated. But true practice did not conclude here. This was merely the ground level. Ichi opened his eyes. The path ahead was no longer frightening. It was infinite, yes, but empty of expectation. He did not feel strong. He felt usable. And that was enough. The seventh phase arrived as loss. Not physical loss, but erosion. The sharpness Ichi had gained began to blur at the edges. His movements were still efficient, his awareness stable, yet something vital was thinning. Emotion drained from effort. Purpose flattened into routine. Discipline continued, but it no longer felt chosen. It simply happened. This frightened him more than pain ever had. Yamamoto noticed, as he always did. "You are entering the most dangerous stage," the master said quietly. "The stage where nothing is wrong." Ichi did not understand at first. Nothing is wrong sounded like success. But success, Yamamoto explained, is where vigilance dies. Days passed with mechanical perfection. Strikes landed clean. Sparring ended efficiently. Breath remained steady. Inside, however, a subtle numbness spread. Not exhaustion. Not resistance. Absence. The fire that once drove him was gone. Awareness remained, but without heat. Ichi questioned himself in silence. Had discipline hollowed him out? Was this the cost of permanence? He tracked the thoughts without judgment, yet they returned. The mind demanded meaning. Without struggle, it searched for justification. One evening, Yamamoto led him beyond the dojo, past the village, to a field where old training weapons were buried. He told Ichi to dig. No explanation. Just dig. The soil was dense. Progress was slow. The task was pointless. That was the point. As the hours passed, frustration arose. Then boredom. Then irritation. Then nothing. The body continued without commentary. Muscles burned. Sweat fell. The hole deepened. When Ichi finally struck wood, he uncovered an old bakken, rotted and split. Yamamoto gestured for him to lift it. The weapon crumbled in his hands. "This is purpose built on feeling," the master said. "It decays." Ichi stared at the fragments. He understood. Motivation fades. Emotion rots. Meaning built on excitement cannot survive time. Yamamoto continued, "Discipline cannot depend on desire. Desire changes. Discipline must exist without reason." The words felt heavy, final. A stripping away of the last illusion. That night, Ichi sat longer than usual. No technique. No focus object. Just presence. The numbness remained. He did not resist it. He did not chase inspiration. He stayed. Something subtle occurred. The numbness did not vanish. It transformed. Beneath it, a quieter sensation emerged. Not passion. Not excitement. Reliability. A steadiness that did not fluctuate with mood. The next morning, training resumed as always. But now, there was no internal commentary at all. No questioning. No justification. The body moved. Awareness observed. Time passed. Ichi realized this was the death of the final comfort. Even suffering had once provided identity. Now, nothing did. He was no longer the struggling warrior, nor the disciplined ascetic. He was simply a man practicing. That simplicity was terrifying. And freeing. Later, Yamamoto spoke one final time that week. "If you continue, people will think you are empty. Ichi nodded. He already felt it. They will be wrong, the master added. You are becoming stable. Ichi bowed. He no longer needed reassurance. The path ahead was clear not because it was visible, but because there was no alternative. He would train. Not for growth. Not for mastery. Because this was what remained when every story fell away. And he accepted it without resistance. The eighth phase did not feel like training at all. It felt like disappearance. Ichi noticed it first in small moments. While eating, there was no internal voice commenting on taste or effort. While walking, no sense of progress or destination. Even during combat, the familiar boundary between action and awareness softened. Things happened, but there was no center claiming them. This absence was not peace. It was unsettling. Without inner narration, time behaved differently. Hours passed unnoticed. Fatigue arrived late, departed quietly. The body functioned with ruthless efficiency, yet Ichi felt less present in the way he once understood presence. Awareness had widened, but the self inside it had thinned almost to nothing. He brought this to Yamamoto, expecting correction. The master listened without interruption, eyes steady, unreadable. When Ichi finished, Yamamoto said only, "Good. Now do not cling to it." No explanation followed. Clinging had become the final temptation. Ichi sensed it immediately. The mind wanted to claim this state, to label it advancement, to preserve it. Awareness caught the impulse like a hand closing on air. The more he tried to hold it, the more it dissolved. The lesson was clear and merciless. Even emptiness could become attachment. Training shifted again, subtly but decisively. Yamamoto introduced situations that disrupted stillness. Loud environments. Crowded markets. Arguments among villagers. Sudden commands issued mid-task. Ichi was expected to remain precise, responsive, human. Presence was no longer protected by silence. It was tested inside noise. At first, the old self attempted to return. Irritation surfaced. Judgment flickered. The impulse to withdraw appeared. Awareness registered each response without resistance. He stayed. He listened. He acted when needed. The disappearance did not vanish, but it learned to function inside chaos. One afternoon, a group of travelers mocked the dojo openly, laughing at its simplicity. Younger students bristled. One stepped forward, fists clenched. Ichi intervened gently, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. His voice was calm, unreactive. He spoke without authority or apology. The mockery faded, confused by the lack of opposition. Later, the boy asked how Ichi remained unaffected. Ichi searched for an answer and found none. There was no technique. No detachment strategy. Nothing to teach. Reaction simply did not arise. That night, alone, a deeper realization surfaced. He had spent years refining discipline to control himself. Then years dissolving that control. Now, nothing was being controlled at all. Actions occurred. Responses emerged. Awareness witnessed without interference. This frightened him in a way pain never had. If there was no center, no controller, who was responsible? What anchored morality, intention, choice? The question followed him into training. During sparring, a clean opening appeared. A strike would have ended the exchange decisively. The body moved, then stopped. Not from hesitation. From recognition. The strike was unnecessary. The moment passed. The fight ended without conclusion. Yamamoto watched closely. Later, he spoke. Void approaches, he said. Not emptiness. Not nothingness. Function without reference. Ichi understood partially. Enough to continue. Not enough to explain. In the days that followed, he noticed compassion arising naturally, without effort. Not sentiment. Precision. Knowing when to act, when not to. Strength no longer needed demonstration. It simply existed. He also noticed something else. Fear had not vanished. It no longer centered on himself. It appeared as concern for consequence, for impact beyond intention. This was different. Sharper. More demanding. Discipline had stripped him down to function. Now function demanded responsibility without ego. Action without ownership. Presence without identity. One evening, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains, Ichi felt something settle permanently. He would never return to being the man who sought improvement. Improvement implied lack. He was no longer lacking. He was not complete. He was usable. And that, he sensed, was the final preparation before everything he understood would dissolve once more. The ninth phase arrived as confrontation without an enemy. There was no duel, no external test, no dramatic threat. Instead, Ichi was left alone for days at a time, given only a location and a duration. No instructions. No objectives. Just remain. The simplicity was oppressive. Without tasks, without refinement, without struggle, the mind searched desperately for something to engage. At first, nothing happened. He sat. He walked. He slept lightly. Awareness remained wide, neutral. Then slowly, the mind turned inward with a new intensity. Old memories surfaced. Faces from his childhood. Moments of shame he thought long dissolved. The tournament loss replayed not as pain, but as fact. Neutral. Uncharged. The mind offered stories, explanations, judgments. Awareness observed and did not intervene. Hours passed. Then something darker emerged. A question he had never allowed himself to ask. If there is no self, no goal, no arrival, why continue? The question did not carry despair. It carried logic. Cold. Precise. Unemotional. Without identity, without reward, without meaning, action seemed arbitrary. The mind waited for an answer. None came. The absence of response unsettled him more than doubt ever had. He noticed the subtle pull toward annihilation, not death of the body, but cessation of effort. To simply stop. Not from weakness, but from indifference. Awareness held the sensation without resistance. He did not reject it. He did not follow it. He remained. In that remaining, something irreversible occurred. The question dissolved without being answered. Not because it was resolved, but because it was irrelevant. Continuation did not require justification. Practice did not require meaning. Action did not require narrative. The body rose. It moved. Breath continued. Not because of choice. Because this is what bodies do. Ichi felt the weight of that realization settle deeply. He was no longer practicing to become something. He was practicing because practice was the natural expression of being alive. The same way the heart beats. The same way lungs fill. When Yamamoto returned, days later, he did not ask what Ichi experienced. He looked at him once and nodded. The master saw the change. The absence of seeking. The lack of tension. The quiet gravity that replaced striving. You stood at the edge, Yamamoto said. Most turn back. Some fall. You remained. Ichi did not respond. Words would have reduced it. Training resumed, but it felt different now. Not lighter. Not heavier. Just accurate. Movements emerged exactly as needed. No excess. No hesitation. When corrected, adjustment occurred instantly. No resistance. No internal dialogue. The other students sensed it. They could not name it, but they stepped aside unconsciously. Not from fear. From recognition. Something in Ichi no longer negotiated with the world. That night, he sat beneath the open sky. No stars were visible. Clouds obscured everything. He felt no disappointment. The sky did not owe him clarity. For the first time since the path began, Ichi understood what could not be taught. Discipline was not about becoming strong enough to endure life. It was about dissolving the one who needed endurance. What remained was not a warrior as history described it. Not fierce. Not noble. Not heroic. Just present. And incapable of turning back. The final phase did not feel like an ending. It felt like removal. When Ichi returned fully to the dojo, nothing ceremonial occurred. No acknowledgement. No declaration of completion. The others trained as they always had. Yamamoto gave no new instruction. Life continued uninterrupted, and that continuity was the final test. Ichi noticed that effort no longer preceded action. He did not prepare himself to train. He simply trained. He did not motivate himself to rise before dawn. He rose. The distinction between discipline and living had vanished. There was no practice separate from existence. Everything was practice, or nothing was. Students watched him closely now. Not because he demonstrated superiority, but because he no longer displayed struggle. Pain appeared and passed. Failure occurred and corrected itself. Praise reached him and dissolved without absorption. Criticism landed and vanished without defense. He did not resist, because there was nothing left to protect. One morning, a new student asked him quietly, "When does it get easier?" The question echoed something ancient. Ichi looked at the boy's face, familiar with hope, with hunger, with the belief that discipline is a bridge to comfort. He answered honestly. "It doesn't. You do not become comfortable. You become capable." The boy nodded, not understanding yet. Ichi did not explain further. Understanding would arrive only through erosion. Yamamoto approached later that day, carrying a wrapped blade. He placed it between them without ceremony. "This belonged to your grandfather," he said. He walked the path honorably. But he never crossed the final threshold. Ichi accepted the sword with both hands, feeling its weight, its balance, its quiet indifference. Steel did not care who wielded it. That was its purity. "You are not finished," the master continued. "You never will be. That is the point." Ichi bowed, not deeply, not formally, but naturally. Respect had become posture, not gesture. That evening, alone, Ichi reflected for the first time in months. Not with analysis, not with judgment. Simply observation. The tournament defeat felt distant, like a story told about someone else. The pain had not vanished. It had been integrated. The fear had not been conquered. It had lost authority. He understood now what discipline had taken from him. Illusion. Narrative. Comfort. And what it had given him was not happiness or fulfillment, but something more demanding. Clarity. The clarity to act without needing reward. The clarity to continue without certainty. The clarity to exist fully inside effort without expecting arrival. He rose before dawn the next morning as he always did. The dojo was silent. The floor cold. He swept it slowly, deliberately, every stroke complete. Not because it mattered. Because this moment did. Outside, the world remained unchanged. People slept. People dreamed. People avoided discomfort and chased meaning. Ichi did neither. He trained. He lived. He remained awake. The path did not end with mastery. It ended with disappearance. And in that disappearance, the discipline finally became complete.